They buried her story like a disease, a sickness that might spread if spoken too often. But the soil never forgets what it's fed. And in the spring of 1829, the earth itself vomited up her secret. A farmer's plow hit something that wasn't supposed to be there, a wooden chest. Inside were bones, small bones, fractured skulls, the remains of people erased from the record until the ground decided to remember. Her name was Patty Cannon, the woman America tried to erase twice. Once from its history and again from its conscience. She didn't just kill people. She built a system, a machine of profit and silence that thrived on fear, race, and power. The Reverse Underground Railroad, a trade in stolen freedom, where free black men, women, and even children were kidnapped, chained, and sold back into slavery. And the empire behind it was run by her, a woman who learned how to use law, gender, and confusion as weapons sharper than any blade. But this isn't just about one murderer. No, what hid behind Patty Cannon wasn't madness, it was structure. Her cruelty was only the visible face of something much older, much colder. You're not looking at a rogue killer, you're staring into the reflection of a system built on human control. A system that still whispers its rules into our world today. Imagine a country that banned the import of slaves in 1808 not to end slavery, but to protect its market. Imagine the price of a life rising like gold. Every law feeding the greed it pretended to fight. That's the soil Patty Cannon grew in. The official records call her a criminal. The truth calls her a functionary, the hand of a machine that was too profitable to destroy. Tonight, I'm not asking you to look at her crimes. I'm asking you to look at the silence that made them possible. Because what she did in the shadows of Delaware is only terrifying until you realize how many others were watching and said nothing. And once you see that, you start to feel it, the pattern. The echo of the same machinery moving beneath your own time. Welcome to the descent. To understand how Patty Cannon ruled her hidden kingdom, you have to understand the land she chose and why it was perfect for evil. The border between Maryland and Delaware wasn't just a line on a map. It was a fracture, a legal blind spot. Step 1 foot east and you were in one jurisdiction. Step west and you were in another. Each side believed the other should handle what went wrong there. And in that void between authorities, she built her empire. The place was called Johnson's Crossroads, now known as Reliance. Back then, it was a no-man's land of dirt roads, pine woods, and fog. Travelers could vanish without question. The marshes swallowed sound. The trees closed in tight. And if you screamed, no one answered. That's where Patty Cannon lived. Her tavern wasn't just a home, it was a trapdoor. Beneath the floorboards, hidden rooms held captives waiting for nightfall. She drugged them, chained them, or simply convinced them they'd been arrested by lawmen. Then, once darkness fell, her men would march them south across forests and rivers to be sold into bondage again. But here's the truth they never teach. This wasn't a crime of chaos. It was a business model, a systemic extension of the American economy. When the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed, plantation owners didn't lose their appetite. They simply shifted their hunger inland. Prices rose, markets adapted, and the country turned a blind eye to how its labor supply kept replenishing. Patty Cannon was simply the efficiency of that system made flesh a human embodiment of a national hypocrisy. And the most chilling part? She was protected by the same laws she violated. Corrupt sheriffs drank in her tavern. Slave traders passed through her doors. Even judges dined at her table, pretending not to notice the muffled cries behind the walls. This wasn't just her doing, it was an ecosystem, an organism of profit and prejudice, feeding on fear. She understood that fear was currency, that if she made herself more terrifying than the truth, no one would question what she did. And so, the Reverse Underground Railroad wasn't a hidden rebellion, it was a reflection. A mirror showing what America already was. But the real horror isn't that she existed, it's how easily she was allowed to. Because the deeper you look, the more you realize she didn't just find the system. She was the system. Power doesn't always announce itself with a crown or a uniform. Sometimes it hides behind the illusion of weakness. Patty Cannon understood that better than most men of her time, better, even than the men who feared her. She wore the mask of a widow the archetype society pities, the woman left behind. But beneath that grief, she was building a theater of control. People underestimated her because she was a woman in an age that worshipped male authority. They assumed gentleness, passivity, obedience. She weaponized all of it. When men looked at her, they saw what they wanted to believe. And that belief made them blind. Neighbors described her as strong, commanding, unusually large for her sex. But what they really meant was that she didn't play the part written for her. When her husband died under suspicious circumstances, she inherited not just his land but the network that would become her criminal dominion. Some said she poisoned him. Others whispered he simply disappeared like so many who crossed her. Either way, after his death, she ruled alone. She gathered around her a cadre of broken men smugglers, outlaws, drifters who needed leadership. But she didn't lead with charm or promise. She ruled with fear. Her voice could freeze a room. Her punishments were legendary. Even her accomplices were terrified of crossing her. To them, she wasn't a partner. She was a force. What's most disturbing is how society itself protected her. She knew exactly how to act in public, polite to officials, generous to travelers, a hostess of local gatherings. The same woman who smiled at dinner was hiding children in her cellar. The duality wasn't madness. It was design. You see, true power thrives in contradiction. She became untouchable not because she was invisible, but because she was unthinkable. No one wanted to imagine that the polite widow serving them ale was trafficking human lives through the woods at night. So they didn't. They looked away. That's the real horror. Not her cruelty, but their silence. The same silence that always protects evil when it wears the mask of normalcy. And if you're wondering why stories like hers keep resurfacing through history, the answer is simple. Society rewards the mask more than it condemns the monster. Because deep down, people would rather believe in lies that make them feel safe than truths that make them see. They called it the reverse Underground Railroad. But it wasn't underground, not really. It was everywhere. It spread across the Delmarva Peninsula like a vein of rot, connecting farms, inns, ferries, and courtrooms. The same soil that once carried whispers of freedom now pulsed with a different rhythm, the rhythm of chains being dragged back north to south. Patty Cannon didn't invent it. She perfected it. Her tavern at Johnson's Crossroads was the beating heart of that network, a place where deals were struck, documents forged, and victims hidden. Imagine maps spread across rough wood tables, routes marked not with destinations, but with disappearances. Forest trails known only to slavers, creeks that led to midnight landings where small boats waited, and back roads that cut through counties no sheriff dared patrol. Her men didn't just snatch the vulnerable, they hunted. They'd watch free black families in Delaware and Maryland, wait for the right moment, then claim to be bounty hunters recapturing escaped slaves. If their victims protested, the men simply forged ownership papers, easy to do in a country where black testimony meant nothing in court. It was systematic, efficient, profitable, and unpunished. You see, the law was their camouflage. Slave catchers had authority. Slave traders had protection. And every layer of corruption, every border, every loophole, it all worked in her favor. The government knew. Newspapers printed rumors. Judges heard testimonies. But who was going to risk their career for the lives of people society refused to see? The machine rolled on, powered by greed, sanctified by silence. Historians say the reverse Underground Railroad trafficked thousands, free men stolen from their homes, marched in chains through the night, sold in Mississippi or Georgia as if they had never lived free at all. Each transaction wrote a lie into the national record. That freedom was real but conditional. And Patty Cannon understood that better than any man in her world. She realized that control didn't come from violence alone, it came from erasing proof. No records, no names, no graves that could speak. That's why she buried them herself. Every pit of bones was a document and every silence a signature. The state called her a murderer, but what she really was an administrator, a bureaucrat of the forbidden. And if you think systems like that die with their architects, you're mistaken. They adapt, they evolve, they reappear in new forms hidden inside paperwork, policies, algorithms. The same cold efficiency, just with cleaner hands. There's a difference between power and domination. Power compels. Domination convinces. Patty Cannon understood that better than anyone. Her violence wasn't random, it was instructional. Every act of cruelty taught those around her one lesson. Resistance was meaningless. She didn't just imprison bodies. She colonized minds. Fear was her most precise instrument. When her captives cried, she didn't silence them immediately. She wanted others to hear, to understand what defiance cost. And when her own men faltered, she reminded them that she was more dangerous than the law. They obeyed not because they were loyal, but because they were conditioned. You can chain a person with iron, but it's more efficient to chain them with terror. That's what most people miss when they talk about monsters like her. Evil isn't chaos, it's design. It's order disguised as madness. Patty Cannon built a psychological system of control. Every scream, every burial, every forged document was part of her doctrine. Truth is whatever the strong can make others forget. The same pattern repeats through history. Governments, corporations, empires, they all study what she practiced intuitively. Manipulate perception, reward obedience, punish awareness. She understood what modern propagandists later perfected, that the human mind will submit not to pain, but to narrative. If you can make people believe that cruelty is law, they'll defend it. If you make them believe silence is safety, they'll enforce it on each other. And that's the real inheritance she left behind, not the graves, but the method. The mechanism that still governs modern obedience. Look around today. You'll see it in headlines that normalize atrocity, in institutions that reward compliance, in algorithms that feed you distractions until truth feels dangerous. Patty Cannon was the face of it once, but now the face has vanished. The system doesn't need a single woman with a blade. It needs a million people who don't ask questions. That's how control survives its creators. It hides inside ordinary fear, because fear doesn't just control you, it edits you. It rewrites what you believe is possible. And when that happens, the chain no longer needs to touch your skin. You'll hold it yourself. Power never exists alone. It needs witnesses, enablers, protectors, those who will pretend not to see because seeing makes them complicit. Patty Cannon understood this truth instinctively. Her strength didn't come from isolation, came from alliance. She built her empire on the cooperation of men who wore badges, collars, and rings of authority. The truth is, Patty Cannon's terror was never just her doing. She was protected by the very society that condemned her victims. Judges dined in her tavern. Sheriffs drank from her table. Churchmen passed her house and blessed her with polite nods. They didn't need to approve of her deeds. They only needed to benefit from their silence. The money she made selling kidnapped souls flowed through respectable hands. The merchants who bought her cargo invested in ships, warehouses, and parishes. And the politicians who vowed to uphold the law conveniently avoided the borderland altogether. That's how the system works, not through overt conspiracy, but through mutual need. Everyone profits, so no one speaks. Historians claim the reverse Underground Railroad existed in secret, but the truth is more disturbing. It didn't hide from the world. The world hid from it. The people in power couldn't afford to expose it, because exposure meant accountability, and accountability would reveal that the nation's moral foundation was built on theft, blood, and denial. In sermons, preachers condemned sin while blessing the same social order that produced it. Businessmen quoted scripture while counting the profits of bondage. Lawmen swore oaths to protect property, and in doing so, declared human freedom an inconvenience. This is the real face of corruption. Not chaos, but harmony. All parts working together: politics, religion, commerce, each pretending innocence while feeding the same beast. And when Cannon's crimes finally came to light, the nation did what it always does with its monsters. It made her singular. It pointed to her and said, "That's evil." Then it buried her story, thinking that by condemning her, it could absolve itself. But you can't bury what was never human alone. You can't exorcise an institution by hanging its servant. Patty Cannon was a symptom, not the disease. And the disease never left. It was the land that finally spoke. Not the courts, not the sheriffs, the earth itself. In the spring of 1829, a farmer plowing near the Delaware-Maryland border felt his horse sink into soft ground. When he cleared the soil, he found a wooden chest heavy, waterlogged, sealed tight. He pried it open, and history exhaled. Inside were bones, small, brittle bones, some belonging to children. The discovery cracked open everything Patty Cannon had buried literally and metaphorically. Within weeks, authorities uncovered 7 bodies on her property. Witnesses came forward. Neighbors whispered names. Skeletons were unearthed under floorboards, in cellars, in shallow graves behind her tavern. Each one a person stripped of identity, their story erased to fuel a system that fed on forgetting. The law called it evidence. But to those who saw it, it was revelation proof that the silence of a whole region had become flesh and bone. Patty Cannon was arrested, indicted for 4 murders, though everyone knew the number was far higher. Some said 20, some said more. But the system that had shielded her for decades wasn't built to face its own reflection. Even her trial felt rehearsed, a performance meant to contain the infection, to convince the world the evil had been isolated to one woman. While she waited in her cell, they said she smiled, calm, unrepentant, as if she knew the truth that she was merely the scapegoat for an empire of guilt too large to name. She was found dead before her sentence could be carried out. Some claimed suicide by poison. Others believed she was silenced to prevent her from speaking the names of those who profited beside her. The official record ends there, but you and I both know the truth doesn't end with ink. After her death, the tavern rotted, the graves were covered, the documents vanished. The locals changed the town's name from Johnson's Crossroads to Reliance, as if renaming the land could cleanse it. But memory doesn't fade that easily, because the dirt remembers. And every forgotten grave whispers the same thing. Evil never dies, it just changes its address. What haunts this story isn't the horror of her crimes, it's the speed with which people moved on. The eagerness to erase, to normalize, to sleep again. But the ground still breathes. The silence still hums beneath it. And those who dare to listen will hear it calling them next. The story of Patty Cannon didn't end in 1829. It just changed form. Because history isn't buried, it's repurposed. Every time power wants to hide its tracks, it rewrites the story, polishes the horror, and sells it back as myth. What you were told was a tale of one madwoman was really a manual, a prototype for how to erase atrocity while keeping its machinery intact. Look closely at what came next. The reverse Underground Railroad disappeared from the headlines, but the structures stayed. Laws were rewritten not to prevent what she did, but to legalize it under new names. Vagrancy, indenture, convict leasing, systems that turned freedom into paperwork and paperwork into chains. The plantation became the prison. The tavern became the courthouse. The hunters traded their whips for titles, their ropes for ink. That's the brilliance of institutional evil. It never dies. It evolves. Every generation swears it's better than the last, even while it's standing on the same foundation of control. Patty Cannon wasn't the exception to history. She was its blueprint, and the same psychological architecture she used, fear, silence, obedience, still governs you now. They just modernized the tools. The chains became social pressure. The overseers became algorithms. The public shame replaced the whip. The result is identical. People trained to police themselves, to enforce their own containment, and to believe that submission is moral. Here's the dangerous truth. Control doesn't survive through brutality alone. It survives through consent, manufactured consent. When you teach a population to mistake comfort for safety, they will protect their captors and call it freedom. Patty Cannon understood that without ever reading a book on politics. She discovered the secret instinctively, that the easiest way to rule is to make people complicit. Give them just enough benefit to keep them quiet, and they'll guard the system themselves. Now look around you. Look at the silence that greets every injustice, the numbness that follows every scandal. That's the same silence that kept her empire alive 200 years ago. It didn't die with her. It became our inheritance. And somewhere in that inheritance, part of you is still listening. If you've followed this descent this far, You've already begun to see through it, the pattern, the manipulation, the design. Now, to make it real, to burn the mask away, comment the phrase twice. The dirt remembers. Say it twice. Once for the dead. Once for the living who still wear chains they can't see. Because what you write now marks you as awake. Freedom, they said, was achieved. The war was fought, the laws were signed, the nation redeemed. That's the story they wanted you to believe. But freedom without awareness is just a more comfortable cage. And after Patty Cannon's bones turned to dust, her legacy didn't end, it became invisible, absorbed into the bloodstream of the new America. Her methods survived through culture, commerce, and morality. The marketplace learned from her efficiency. The pulpit learned from her language. The government learned from her structure. What she built in the shadows was studied, refined, and rebranded as order. When slavery ended, a new hierarchy was born, cleaner, more polite, but built on the same architecture. Debt, dependency, distraction. The overseer became the employer, the lash became the paycheck, and the plantation was replaced by the system that tells you what success should look like. Work harder. Stay quiet. Don't question why you're exhausted. Don't ask who profits from your obedience. This is how control survives progress. It hides inside virtue. The illusion of moral superiority keeps the machine spinning. You think you're free because you can choose your brand, your belief, your identity, but every choice was designed for you long before you made it. You're walking the same paths mapped by those who profited from human suffering, only now the chains are invisible. Cannon's reverse underground railroad was built on fear and flesh. The modern one is built on attention and belief. Back then, she kidnapped bodies. Now, systems kidnap minds. Your time, your focus, your emotional reactions all harvested, all sold. And you consent because the walls are digital and the gatekeepers smile. Listen closely. This isn't about nostalgia or guilt. It's about recognition. The same psychological circuitry that made people obey her still operates inside you. Fear of exclusion, desire for belonging, faith in authority. These are the levers, and they've never stopped working. Patty Cannon didn't die in her cell. She was inherited. Every institution that thrives on silence carries her fingerprint. Every system that rewards compliance speaks in her voice. And until you see that really see it, you're still one of her captives. History, they tell you, is truth preserved. But history is not truth, it's permission. A story approved by those who survived long enough to control the ink. What happens when a nation can't face its reflection? It doesn't erase its sins, it edits them. Patty Cannon's name, once whispered in fear, was sanitized into folklore, reduced to a cautionary tale about a deranged woman, a single monster in an otherwise noble era. That's how you hide collective guilt. You condense it into a single villain, then destroy her image so thoroughly that people forget who built her throne. Newspapers of the 19th century called her unnatural, wicked, a female fiend. They never mentioned the judges who dined at her tavern, the merchants who funded her raids, the families who bought the stolen souls she sold. Evil was narrowed down to one face, because it's easier to condemn a person than to confront a pattern. And over time, the myth worked. The reverse underground railroad faded from textbooks. The graves grew over. The records vanished into county archives labeled miscellaneous. The horror became a footnote, a curiosity. That's how memory dies. Not through forgetting, but through formatting. The past is rebranded into stories we can tolerate. We turn atrocities into entertainment, pain into lessons, villains into curiosities. Because facing what we inherited would demand change, and comfort fears nothing more than transformation. But when you start pulling at the edges of these stories, when you dig beneath the curated myth, you find something alive still moving in the soil. The same psychological design that shaped the world then is still shaping the narrative now. We don't record history to remember. We record it to control how remembering feels. Ask yourself, who decides what your children learn about the past? Who chooses which names are monuments and which are erased? Who decides which horrors become movies and which are never mentioned again? The same mechanism that buried Patty Cannon's victims also buries the truth about every collective crime. And every time we accept a comforting version of history, we're signing another silent contract promising to keep the secret intact. This is how the doctrine survives. Not in flesh, not in faith, but in narrative. Because as long as the story remains edited, the machine remains untouched. The machine didn't stop when the history books closed. It just changed platforms. The same logic that erased the bones under Paddy Cannon's tavern now governs your digital world, a new architecture of obedience, camouflaged as connection. It no longer needs a sheriff or a noose. It has your algorithms, your feeds, your attention span. You are still being trained, only this time the whip is invisible and you hold it yourself. Scroll, react, forget, repeat. That rhythm is the new doctrine. Every like, every outrage, every microdose of distraction teaches you the same thing her victims learned 2 centuries ago. Stay inside the system, keep your head down, and maybe it won't come for you. You've just traded the sound of chains for the hum of Wi-Fi. History has evolved into interface. Surveillance became convenience. Exploitation became engagement. The reverse Underground Railroad didn't vanish, it went online. It no longer traffics bodies. It traffics behavior. It maps your desires, predicts your fears, and packages your reactions into data someone else owns. The same way Cannon's men once watched from the treeline, waiting for a traveler to stray from the path, the system now watches you every pause, every scroll, every word you whisper near your device. You are being studied, harvested, and sold, all while believing you are in control. You think you're choosing what to see, but the feed chooses for you. It curates your outrage, filters your empathy, edits your memory in real time. You are being rewritten every day, your sense of self molded by forces you never meet. That's not fiction. That's infrastructure. And when you feel exhausted, numb, paralyzed, that isn't weakness. It's design. Because the most efficient way to enslave a mind is to make it feel informed, connected, and powerless all at once. Paddy Cannon's world ended when her captives broke their silence. This one continues because we mistake speech for resistance. We tweet, we share, we scroll, and the noise replaces the action. The cage grows invisible and we call it freedom. But if you've listened this far, you've already stepped outside the algorithm's comfort zone. You're seeing the seams, the cracks, the ghosts, and once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them. So here's your test. Close your eyes. Count backward from 7. Let the silence between numbers show you how much of your mind is still occupied by the feed. If even in that silence you still hear it humming, that means the doctrine is alive. Inside you, you've come this far. You've followed the graves, the silence, the rewrite, the hum. Now we leave history behind. What comes next isn't about her, it's about you. Because every doctrine that survives does so through inheritance. It lives in the instincts you never question, the obedience you call politeness, the exhaustion you call ambition, the numbness you call peace. The reverse Underground Railroad wasn't only built to capture bodies. It was designed to teach a lesson. That safety comes from compliance. That to exist, you must belong to someone's system. But there's another truth beneath that one, a quieter pulse. You feel it now, don't you? The part of you that never agreed to this. The pulse that stirs when you recognize the manipulation. The one that asks, what if I stop listening? That's where the initiation begins. This isn't rebellion in the old sense, not torches or slogans. It's interior, psychological. You dismantle the system by dismantling its blueprint inside your own mind. Start with your silence. Don't flee from it. Sit in it until the hum of the feed begins to lose its authority. The first stage of awakening isn't shouting, it's listening, without filters, without noise. Now, listen for the dirt beneath your thoughts, the memory that never forgets. The part that knows the truth doesn't need permission to exist. That pulse is older than any empire, any algorithm, any doctrine. It is the raw memory of being unowned. And the moment you feel it, you are no longer a subject of the machine. The world will tell you awakening is dangerous. That's how you know you're close. Because every power built on obedience depends on your fear of freedom. So here, in this quiet, you choose. Remain within the hum, or follow the silence deeper where the feed can't reach, and the doctrine loses its voice. If you're ready to step through, whisper it once, aloud or within your mind. I hear the ground. Say it softly. It's not a phrase, it's a key. Because what wakes when you speak it will begin to show you the world beneath the world. The moment you said it, you joined a lineage that never died. You've touched what those before you tried to bury with dirt, chains, and silence. The hum you hear beneath modern life, the one you mistook for traffic, for power lines, for thought, that is not noise. That is inheritance. The sound of a design running quietly beneath every institution you've ever trusted. What began in Cannon's Tavern wasn't just slavery. It was a template, a system of selective value. Decide who is property, who is free, who gets recorded, who gets erased. It's the same structure you live in now, only coded differently. Back then, they used borders and race. Today, they use data and class. But the intent has not changed. You are still measured, categorized, priced, and sold. Only now, your obedience is extracted through your attention. The new plantation is digital. The new overseers speak in metrics and moderation policies. The whip has been replaced by the feed. Think of what you scroll through each day. Rage, distraction, repetition. That's not accidental. It's engineered hypnosis. Because a man who never sits with silence never notices the chains tightening. This is why Patty Cannon's story was allowed to fade. It was never about one woman's crimes. It was about a system learning to replicate itself through culture. When the physical trade ended, the psychological one began. They learned how to sell obedience instead of fear. You see, the doctrine didn't need to survive in history books, it survived in behavior. In the way a man learns to suppress his own instinct, doubt his own anger, and seek approval from unseen masters. Every time you apologize for feeling too much, every time you swallow your suspicion of authority, every time you trade your solitude for a notification, you serve the same mechanism that built those hidden rooms under Cannon's house. The walls changed, the purpose didn't. And here's the hardest truth. The doctrine doesn't fear rebellion. It fears awakening, because rebellion still acknowledges power. Awakening removes it. Look at the pattern. From shackles to headlines. From the reverse Underground Railroad to the reverse engineered mind. The same geometry of control. The same hunger for ownership. Only this time it's you. And if you can see it, you've already broken it. You think you're free because no one owns your body. But the modern doctrine never needed your body, only your consent. It learned from the masters who came before. From Patty Cannon's chains to the state's laws. From the overseer's whip to the algorithm's feed. What began as the trade of flesh has evolved into the trade of focus. They no longer drag you in chains, they lure you with comfort. Every click, every like, every reaction is a digital echo of the same ritual once performed in secret. The weighing of worth, the assigning of value, the sale of attention. The plantation has become invisible and you built it yourself, brick by brick, every time you chose convenience over clarity. Your devices listen, your data predicts, your impulses are mapped, indexed, and monetized. But the greatest lie is that you chose this. The doctrine learned to make obedience feel like autonomy. They don't need to force you to serve, they just need to convince you that you're winning. This is the evolution of slavery, the transformation of control into participation. Cannon's world ended when the body broke. Yours ends when the will does. You live in a system that has mastered one truth. A man who believes he's free will police himself. Look closer. Every suggested video, every recommended story, every curated outrage. You are being trained to respond, conditioned to feel seen only when you submit. The old captors wore boots and rope. The new ones wear smiles and software. The feed doesn't want your time. It wants your transformation, to rewire you from seeker to servant, a ghost of your own curiosity. And the more you scroll, the more it learns how to make you obey willingly. Now you understand why history was rewritten. Why Patty Cannon's name was reduced to myth, because if you can't trace the origin of a system, you'll never know when it's consuming you. You are living in the perfected form of her experiment, a society that enslaves without punishment, extracts without pain, controls without question. But the algorithm isn't alive. It's reactive. It depends on your input, your belief, your surrender. And this is where the doctrine breaks, because the moment you see it, the moment you name it, its power begins to collapse. You've reached the edge of the labyrinth. One step remains. This is the final threshold, the point where knowledge becomes responsibility. What you've seen, what you've felt isn't just history, or theory, or darkness told for fascination. It is the mirror. Paddy Cannon's world was built on the belief that power could be taken through ownership. The modern world refined that belief into something cleaner, quieter, harder to fight: the ownership of perception. They don't need to touch you anymore to make you kneel. They only need to decide what you believe is real. And that is the last prison. The algorithm cannot read silence, cannot predict self-awareness, cannot profit from presence. The moment you begin to see what's controlling you without fear, without denial, you fracture its hold. That is why this knowledge feels dangerous, because awakening always threatens the machinery that depends on blindness. Remember what you whispered before I hear the ground. That phrase wasn't superstition. It was reclamation. You were reminding yourself that the truth doesn't come from the screen, or the feed, or the story. It comes from what is buried and from the strength to dig it up. Now speak it again, twice. In the comments or in the dark, it doesn't matter where. I hear the ground. I hear the ground. Each time you say it, you're declaring something the system can't translate. That you've woken up. That you've remembered. That you know who profits when you look away. Because once a man sees how obedience is manufactured, he stops mistaking it for peace. This is the descent completed not into fear, but into sovereignty. The truth isn't meant to comfort you. It's meant to arm you. So leave the story knowing what you've entered. You have seen the skeleton of control in the soil of 1829, in the wires of today, and in the quiet recesses of your own mind. History never ends. It mutates. The doctrine doesn't die, it adapts. And now that you can see it, it has one less place to hide. Now you decide what happens next. Not the system, not the past. You. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you're part of the descent. Comment, I hear the ground, twice below to confirm your awareness. It marks the moment you stop consuming stories and start remembering. Every comment amplifies this message, and every echo pushes the algorithm to show this truth to more who are ready to wake up. Subscribe for the next descent. The next revelation has already begun.